My daughter-in-law locked me out of my own house the day after my husband was buried. I didn't scream that I didn't knock. I just stood there, holding a small black suitcase that still smelled like the lavender sachets I had tucked into it years ago. The front door, the same oak door my husband and I had picked out together 32 years ago, was closed. Locked. Silent. And behind it was my life. Everything I had built. Everything I had loved. Gone. I could hear faint movement inside. Footsteps. A drawer sliding shut. The low murmur of voices. My son's voice. And hers. I raised my hand once. Just once. My knuckles hovered inches from the door. Then I lowered it, because something inside me had already understood. I wasn't being accidentally locked out. I was being removed. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end, and tell me where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story travels. The air was colder than I expected for early October, or maybe just felt that way. The sky was a pale gray, stretched thin over the quiet suburban street. The kind of morning that should have felt peaceful, if not for the emptiness pressing against my chest. I shifted my grip on the suitcase. It wasn't heavy. 32 years of marriage, reduced to what I could carry in one hand. I looked down at it for a moment, then back at the door. No note, no explanation, just silence. I had buried my husband 48 hours earlier. 48 hours. That was how long it took for my place in that house to disappear. A car drove past slowly, the driver glancing in my direction. I straightened my posture instinctively. Even now, I refused to look like a woman who had been thrown away. I took a breath, then another, and instead of knocking, I turned around. They thought I had nowhere else to go. That was their first mistake. 48 hours earlier, I was standing in the same kitchen, making coffee. The sunlight came through the window above the sink, soft and golden. It touched the countertops, the old ceramic mugs, the little crack in the tile my husband had always promised to fix. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. The house had changed the moment he died. Not physically, emotionally, silently, like something essential had been removed from the air itself. I poured coffee into 2 mugs out of habit, then paused, stared at them, and slowly poured one back into the pot. Grief doesn't always come as tears. Sometimes it comes as quiet corrections, small realizations that something will never happen again. My son, Daniel, came into the kitchen just as I was placing the mug down. "Morning, Mom," he said. He didn't look at me. Not directly. His eyes move around the room instead. Counter, sink, window, anywhere but my face. That was new. Daniel had always been the kind of man who looked people in the eye. Especially me. "Morning," I replied. My voice sounded steady, stronger than I felt. He opened the fridge, took out a bottle of water, closed it again, too quickly, like he had come in for a reason and forgotten it. "Did you sleep?" I asked. "A little." A pause. Then he added, "Romy didn't sleep at all." Romy, my daughter-in-law. Right on cue, she walked in, perfectly dressed, hair brushed, makeup subtle but intentional. Grief, apparently, did not disturb her routine. "Good morning," she said, her tone polite but distant, like she was speaking to someone she barely knew. I nodded. "Morning." She glanced at the coffee. Only 1 mug now. Her eyes lingered there for a second, then moved away. That was the moment I felt it. Something small, something almost invisible, but sharp. They had already started adjusting to a world without him, a world where I no longer fit the same way. "Daniel," she said lightly, "we should talk later. About the house." The house. It was such a simple word, but the way she said it made it sound like a transaction, not a home. Daniel nodded. "Yeah, later." Still not looking at me. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug and said nothing, because deep down, something had already begun to shift. It was later that afternoon when the doorbell rang. Romy was upstairs. Daniel had gone out, so I answered it myself. Standing on the porch was Mr. Henderson, my husband's old friend and former attorney. He looked uncomfortable, the way people do when they're about to tell you something you don't want to hear. "Mrs. Carter," he said gently, "I hope I'm not intruding." "You're not," I replied. "Please come in." He stepped inside slowly, glancing around the house, taking in the photos on the walls, the furniture, the silence. "I heard about Harold," he said. I'm so sorry. Thank you. We sat in the living room. The same room where my husband used to read every evening. The same chair, still slightly angled toward the lamp, as if he might come back and sit down again. Mr. Henderson didn't sit right away. He hesitated, then finally lowered himself into the armchair across from me. There's something I think you should know, he said. I didn't react. Not outwardly, but inside, everything stilled. What is it? I asked. He folded his hands together, looked at them, then back at me. Has anyone spoken to you about the house yet? There was again. The house. No, I said. A pause. A long one. They're planning to transfer it, he said carefully. The words didn't hit me all at once. They settled slowly, like dust. Transfer it to whom? He hesitated again, then answered. To your son. I held his gaze. That's not unusual, I said calmly. He's the heir. Mr. Henderson shook his head slightly. That's not the part that concerns me. Something colder moved through my chest. What part does? He leaned forward, lowered his voice. The paperwork is already being prepared. Silence filled the room. By whom? I asked. He didn't need to say it, but he did anyway. Romy. And just like that, everything began to make sense. After Mr. Henderson left, I remained in the living room for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I just sat there with my hands folded neatly in my lap, staring at the grandfather clock in the corner while it marked each second with that deep, steady sound Harold used to love. Tick, tick, tick. I had always believed truth arrived like thunder. Loud, obvious, impossible to ignore. But that wasn't true. Real truth often arrived quietly. It slipped into the room wearing the face of memory. It stood beside old moments and changed their shape. And once it did, you couldn't unsee it. I started thinking back, not to one dramatic moment, to the little things. That was where Romy had always done her work. In the little things. A changed tone, a closed door, a sentence that sounded harmless unless you listened twice. I remembered the first time she rearranged my kitchen without asking. It had been 6 months after she married Daniel. I came home from church and found the spice rack moved, the baking dishes boxed up, and the good serving tray Harold's mother gave me placed in the garage beside old paint cans. Oh, I was just helping, she'd said with that polished smile. This setup makes more sense. Helping. That was one of her favorite words. Helping Daniel manage his time. Helping organize family holidays. Helping simplify the house. She always called it help when she moved one more piece of my life out of my reach. I remembered Christmas 2 years ago. I had set the dining table with my white china and folded linen napkins the way I always did. Harold had carved the turkey. Daniel had poured the wine. It should have felt like every Christmas before it. Instead, Romy stood in the doorway, scanning the room with narrowed eyes. We really should do buffet style next year, she'd said. Formal dinners feel a little old-fashioned. Old-fashioned. She didn't say outdated. She didn't say inconvenient. She said old-fashioned while looking directly at me. Back then, I told myself I was being sensitive, that younger women had different tastes, that every new marriage changed a family a little. But now, with Mr. Henderson's warnings still echoing in my ears, I saw the pattern. She hadn't been adapting to the family. She had been replacing it, replacing my way of doing things, my role, my place. And Daniel, he had let her. There was another memory, one that came back, so clearly it made my fingers tighten. 3 weeks before Harold died, I had returned from the grocery store and found Romy in our bedroom. Not her bedroom, ours. She stood near Harold's desk, holding a folder. I remember how still she went when she saw me. Oh, she'd said with a little laugh. I was just looking for a warranty paper Daniel mentioned. In Harold's private desk, in our room. At the time, I only nodded. I was tired. Harold had already been sick then, and exhaustion makes a woman overlook what she should not. But now I knew. She hadn't been looking for a warranty paper. She had been looking for leverage. Later that evening, I went upstairs and opened the hall closet where we kept important household documents in a locked fireproof box. The box was still there, but the key Harold always kept taped beneath the top shelf was gone. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty strip of shelf. A clean, pale square where the tape had once been. No one had mentioned moving it. No one had asked. I closed the closet door slowly. The house felt different now, not only because Harold was gone, because for the first time, I understood I had been living among people who no longer saw me as family, only as an obstacle. That evening, Daniel and Romy ate dinner on the patio. I could hear the soft clink of forks through the screen door while I sat alone in the breakfast nook with a bowl of soup I barely touched. I heard her laugh once. Low, certain. Then I heard my name. I couldn't make out the sentence. Only the tone. Dismissive. Controlled. Final. Daniel didn't defend me. I would have heard that. Instead, there was silence. Then another quiet laugh. That hurt more than any shouted insult ever could. Because cruelty is one thing. Agreement is another. When I carried my dish to the sink, I glanced through the glass and saw Daniel rubbing the back of his neck the way he always did when something made him uncomfortable. He wasn't happy, but he wasn't stopping her either. And that told me exactly what kind of man my son had become. Not a cruel man by instinct, a weak one by habit. Sometimes weakness does more damage than malice ever can. That night, I went into my bedroom and opened Harold's side of the dresser. His watch was still there. His handkerchiefs folded in neat stacks. The reading glasses with one slightly loose arm. I picked up the watch and held it in my palm. I see it now. I whispered into the quiet room. Not because I expected an answer. Because after a lifetime of keeping peace, I needed to hear the truth out loud. I see it now. And once I said it, something inside me settled. Not healed. Settled. The confusion was gone. Pain remained. Grief remained. But confusion had left the room. In its place was clarity. Cold. Precise. Useful clarity. By the time I turned out the bedside lamp, I knew two things. Romy had been planning this longer than I realized. And if I wanted to survive what came next, I would have to let her believe I still knew nothing. The next morning, I waited until Daniel left for work. Romy stayed upstairs longer than usual. I could hear the soft rhythm of closet doors opening and shutting, hangers sliding, dresser drawers closing with careful force. She was dressing for something. Not grief. Not mourning. Something administrative. That was the word that came to mind. Administrative. As if my husband's death were already becoming paperwork. I made oatmeal, washed the pan, wiped the counter. Then I took my purse, my car keys, and drove to the bank. The same bank Harold and I had used for 27 years. The kind of local branch where the tellers still looked up and smiled when you walked in. The kind of place where loyalty still meant something. When I stepped through the glass doors, the young teller at the front desk recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Carter," she said softly, "I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you," I replied. "My husband worked with Mr. Jenkins in estate services. He asked me to let you know he'd see you whenever you were ready." I nodded. "I'm ready now." A few minutes later, I was seated in a private office with Thomas Jenkins, a gray-haired man Harold trusted enough to call stubborn and reliable in the same sentence. He closed the door, folded his hands, and gave me a long, kind look. "Margaret," he said, "I was sorry to hear about Harold." I smiled faintly. I think half this town has said that to me this week. That's because half this town meant it. That nearly broke me. Not because it was dramatic, because it was true. Harold had mattered to people. Quietly. Deeply. The way decent men often do. Thomas opened a file. "Your husband left detailed instructions," he said. "He updated several things 8 months ago." 8 months. Thomas nodded. He said he wanted everything clear. No confusión. No delay. I thought of Harold at the kitchen table late at night, studying papers through his reading glasses while I told him not to overwork himself. I had assumed he was settling routine financial matters. I hadn't realized he was preparing a shield. Thomas slid a packet toward me. Inside were copies of trust documents, account instructions, and property protections I had never seen in full. The house, I learned, had not automatically gone to Daniel. It had been placed into a spousal living trust years earlier, with me as the sole lifetime beneficiary and controlling trustee after Harold's death. Meaning no sale, no transfer, no change of title, not without my direct signature, and not under pressure. I read that paragraph twice, then a third time. My fingers were steady, but only just. "So the house is yours to live in, control, and retain for the rest of your life," Thomas said clearly. "No one can remove you from it lawfully. No one can transfer it on your behalf without fraud. Fraud. A clean word. A powerful one. I looked up. Has anyone asked about these documents? He paused, then answered with care. Yes. I already knew who. Still, I asked. Who? Your daughter-in-law called yesterday morning. She said she was helping organize the estate. She wanted to know how quickly title transfer could happen. My stomach turned cold. Yesterday morning, before Harold was even in the ground, Thomas continued. I told her nothing could happen without you. She sounded disappointed. Not upset. Not confused. Disappointed. Because she already had expectations. Because she had already pictured my removal as a step in her plan. I sat back in the chair. For a moment, all the sounds in the room seemed to grow distant. The hum of the overhead vent. A printer somewhere outside. Footsteps moving past the office door. Harold knew. Maybe not every detail. Maybe not the full shape of her greed. But he had known enough. Enough to protect me. Enough to leave the lock on the real door in my hands. Thomas reached into the file again. There's something else. He handed me a smaller envelope. My name was written across the front in Harold's hand. Not printed. Written. That familiar strong script with a slight rightward slant. My throat tightened. I didn't know about this, I said. He asked that it be given to you only after his passing, and only in private. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of cream paper folded in thirds. Margaret, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and I hate that thought more than I can say. But I know this much. You are stronger than anyone in this family gives you credit for. I stopped there, blinking hard, then continued. If anyone makes you feel small in your own home, remember this house was built around your life as much as mine. Do not let charm, pressure, or guilt move you 1 inch. Some people wait for grief to make a widow easy to push. Don't be easy. I read the final line twice. Trust the papers. Trust your instincts. And if Daniel disappoints you, trust yourself anyway. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Thomas said nothing. He didn't need to. Men like him understood when silence was the respectful thing. When I finally looked up, I felt different. Not better, but steadier. Romy had a plan. So did Harold. The difference was hers depended on secrecy. His depended on truth. I slipped the envelope into my purse and asked one final question. If someone tried to force me out before any legal step was taken, what would that be? Thomas didn't hesitate. Wrongful exclusion at best, he said. Potential elder abuse, depending on the circumstances. I nodded once. That was all, because now I knew what I was dealing with. Not family conflict, not misunderstanding, a calculated attempt. And when I left the bank, I did not drive home right away. I sat in my car under a maple tree with orange leaves blowing across the windshield and let one hard truth settle into place. They had been counting on my grief. That was their second mistake. When I finally returned home, I carried myself exactly the way Romy expected. A little slower, a little quieter, a widow in soft shoes, moving carefully through her own hallway as if she were afraid of taking up too much space. That is the thing people like Romy misunderstand. They think silence means surrender. They think softness means weakness. They mistake restraint for helplessness. I opened the front door and found her in the dining room with a legal pad, a pen, and 3 neat stacks of paper spread across the table I had polished every Sunday for 30 years. She looked up with a small start, then smiled. Too quickly. Oh, she said, I didn't realize you'd gone out. I needed some air. That part, at least, was true. Her eyes dropped briefly to my purse, then back to my face. Are you feeling all right? Such a polished question. Concern worn like costume jewelry. I'm tired, I said. She stood and came around the table. One hand touched my arm lightly. Not warmly. Deliberately. We're all tired. That's why Daniel and I were thinking maybe we should start helping with practical things. There was again. Helping. I looked at the papers on the table. Practical things? Just organizing. Bills, utilities, insurance. You shouldn't have to deal with all that right now. I gave a small nod, as if relieved. That's thoughtful. Her face changed for half a second. A tiny flicker. Surprise. She had expected hesitation. Resistance. Questions. Not cooperation. And because I gave her none, she relaxed. greedy people often do when the door seems to open. She picked up one page and angled it toward me. There are a few forms we may need later. Nothing urgent, just things to make sure the transition is smooth. The transition. I nearly smiled. Instead, I leaned closer and let my eyes move over the page without truly reading it. I already knew enough not to sign anything in my own dining room. Later, I said softly, "My head isn't clear today." "Of course," she replied. "Of course." She gathered the pages quickly, but not before I noticed two words in the upper corner of one form. Property affidavit. That was enough. That evening, Daniel came home early. He found me in the den, knitting the same row twice because my mind was elsewhere. He stood in the doorway with his shoulders tense. "Mom." "Yes." "Romy said you seemed overwhelmed today." I set the knitting in my lap. That was kind of her. He frowned slightly, as if even he didn't believe the sentence. Then he sat across from me. "I know this is a lot." A lot was a small phrase for the collapse of a life. I waited. He rubbed his palms together and looked down. "We just been thinking maybe the house is too much." There it was. Not an attack. Not yet. An idea, placed gently on the table like a knife wrapped in linen. I let a few seconds pass before answering. "It has been my home for 32 years. "I know." "Then why are we discussing whether it's too much?" His jaw tightened. Because somewhere under the influence, under the pressure, under Romy's steady hand on the wheel, part of him still knew he was saying the wrong thing. "We're only trying to think ahead," he said. I lowered my eyes, as if the conversation had exhausted me. "I can't talk about this tonight." He exhaled through his nose. Not angry. Frustrated. At himself, perhaps. At me for not making it easy. At the fact that grief had not made me obedient enough. "All right," he said, standing. "Another time." "Another time," I repeated. After he left the room, I picked up my knitting again and counted stitches I did not care about. My hands looked calm. My breathing looked calm. Inside, every instinct had sharpened. That night, I made 3 calls from the upstairs guest room with the door closed. The first was to Thomas at the bank. The second was to Mr. Henderson. The third was to a locksmith Harold once used after a break-in at the hardware store 15 years earlier. I did not tell anyone everything. I only asked what I needed. Could copies of ownership records be prepared? Yes. Could a legal consult happen discreetly? Yes. Could original locks be documented and changed back if necessary? Also yes. By the time I ended the last call, the plan had begun to form. Not a dramatic plan. Not revenge in the theatrical sense. Something better. Documentation. Timing. Witnesses. Truth arranged in the right order. Before bed, I stood at the top of the stairs and listened. Below me, Daniel and Romy were in the kitchen. Her voice floated upward first. "She's folding faster than I thought." Then Daniel, lower and uncertain. "Just don't push too hard." Romy laughed softly. "If you wait too long, people get attached to ideas that aren't practical." People. Not your mother. People. I stepped back from the stair rail before the floorboard beneath me could creak. Then I returned to my room and closed the door without sound. I sat on the edge of the bed, unpinned my hair, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back looked tired. Older than she had a week ago, but not finished. Not erased. Not beaten. I placed Harold's letter in the top drawer of my nightstand, where I could reach it easily. Then I turned off the lamp and lay in the dark with one thought clear in my mind. Let them believe I was folding. Paper can fold. Steel can bend. But neither breaks as easily as fools expect. The next 2 days, I did nothing unusual. That was the key. I moved through the house the way I always had, quiet steps, steady routines, familiar habits that made me invisible in my own home. I made breakfast. I watered the plants. I folded laundry that no one noticed. And I watched. Romy became more confident. You could see in the way she moved, less cautious now, more deliberate. She no longer waited for me to leave the room before opening drawers or sorting papers. She assumed I had already stepped aside, that I had accepted my role as someone temporary. On Wednesday morning, I found her at the dining table again. Same legal pad, different stack of documents. She didn't even try to hide them this time. "That insurance company needs a response," she said casually when she noticed me looking. I told them I'd handle it. Handle it. Another word that meant take control. I nodded as if grateful. Thank you. That word, thank you, did something interesting. It made her relax, made her believe the door was open. Later that afternoon, while she was out, I stepped into the dining room and looked at the paper she had left behind. Not touching it first, just reading. Property forms, utility transfers, account notifications, all carefully arranged, all moving toward one outcome. Control. I took out my phone, not to call anyone, to take pictures, one page at a time. Front, back, signatures, dates, every detail. My hands did not shake. That surprised me. But then again, clarity does that. It removes hesitation. I placed the papers exactly as I found them. Aligned, neat, untouched. That evening, I made another call. This time to a woman named Claire Watkins, an attorney Mr. Henderson had recommended. She listened without interrupting. That told me she was good. People who rush to speak rarely understand what they're hearing. Do not sign anything, she said when I finished. I won't. And do not confront them yet. I wasn't planning to. A small pause. Then she added, if they try to remove you physically or deny access to your home, that changes everything. I thought of the locked door, the suitcase, the silence. Understand, I said. Before we ended the call, she gave me one instruction. Let them show their full intent. I smiled faintly. They already think I have. That night, I placed my phone on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling, listening, waiting, because something had shifted again. Not in me, in them. Predators grow careless when they believe the outcome is certain. By Thursday, Romy stopped pretending. Not completely, but enough. She no longer asked before making decisions. She informed. We're switching the internet plan, she said over breakfast. The current one is outdated. Outdated. Another quiet dismissal. Daniel barely reacted. He nodded, took a sip of coffee, checked his phone. I watched him closely. There was a tension in his shoulders now. A hesitation, as if something in him was starting to catch up, but not fast enough. That afternoon, I did something deliberate, something small, something strategic. I packed a second suitcase, not because I intended to leave, but because I wanted them to believe I would. I placed it by the stairs where it could not be missed. Folded clothes, a few personal items, nothing important, just enough to look real. Romy noticed it immediately. Her eyes lingered on it as she passed. Then she smiled, not kindly, triumphantly. You're organizing? She asked. Yes, I said simply. She nodded. Good. It's better to take things step by step, as if she were guiding me through my own removal. That evening, I sat in the living room while they talked in the kitchen. They didn't lower their voices anymore. They didn't need to. She's already packing, Romy said. I told you it wouldn't be difficult. Daniel didn't answer right away. I could hear the faint scrape of a chair. Then, quietly, just make sure everything's done right. Right? Such an interesting word. It can mean correct, or it can mean justified. Romy laughed softly. Of course it will be. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not in pain. In calculation. Because that was the moment I knew. They were ready. And when people are ready, they act. The next morning, I made sure to leave the house early. I didn't tell them where I was going. I didn't need to. When I returned in the afternoon, the front door was locked. Of course it was. I stood there for a long second, looking at it. Not surprised. Not angry. Just observing. The suitcase I had left by the stairs was now outside, placed neatly beside the porch, as if it had always belonged there. I could hear movement inside. Footsteps. A chair being moved. A voice. Romy's voice. I did not knock. Not this time. Because this time, I had everything I needed. I turned, picked up the suitcase, and walked away. Exactly the way they wanted. Exactly the way I planned. I didn't go far. Just far enough. I drove to a small hotel 10 minutes away. The kind of place no one asks questions. The kind of place people pass through quietly. The receptionist didn't recognize me. That helped. I signed the register, took the key, walked to the room, set the suitcase down beside the bed, and sat. For the first time since the door had closed behind me, I allowed myself to feel it. Not grief. Not yet. Betrayal. Not sharp. Not explosive. Slow. Heavy. Like something settling into my bones. I took a breath, then another, and reached into my purse. Harold's letter. I unfolded it carefully. Read the last line again. Trust the papers. Trust your instincts. I am, I said quietly. Then I picked up my phone. The first call was to Claire. They locked me out, I said. Her tone changed instantly. Are you safe? Yes. Good. Do not return alone. I won't. The second call was to Mr. Henderson. I think it's time. A pause. Then, I'll make arrangements. The third call was to Thomas at the bank. I need certified copies of everything. They'll be ready in the morning. Everything moved quickly after that. Not loudly, not dramatically, but efficiently. By the next day, I had certified trust documents, account confirmations, legal statements prepared, all with dates, all with signatures, all with weight. That afternoon, Claire met me at the hotel. She was younger than I expected. Sharp eyes, steady posture, no wasted movement. They made a mistake, she said after reviewing everything. I know. No, she corrected gently. They made several. She laid the documents out on the small table. 1. The house is legally under your control. I nodded. 2. Removing you without consent crosses into unlawful territory. Another nod. 3, she said, looking up at me. They assumed you wouldn't act. That made me smile. Just slightly. They're about to learn otherwise. Claire gathered the papers neatly. What do you want to do? I didn't answer right away. I thought about the door, the suitcase, the silence. Then I said the only thing that made sense. I want to go home. The next morning, I stood in front of my house again. But this time, I wasn't alone. Claire stood beside me, her briefcase in hand. Mr. Henderson was there too, quiet but firm. And behind us, a uniformed officer waited near the curb, arms crossed, watching the front door with calm attention. I stepped forward. Not quickly, not hesitantly, just steadily. I knocked. There was movement inside almost immediately. Footsteps, a chair scraping, a voice, Romy's, sharp, surprised. Then silence. The door opened halfway. Romy stood there, perfectly dressed again. But this time, her composure slipped. Just a little. Oh, she said. That was all. Her eyes moved past me. To Claire. To Mr. Henderson. To the officer. And for the first time, I saw uncertainty. Good morning, I said calmly. No anger. No raised voice. Just clarity. Daniel appeared behind her. His face changed the moment he saw me. Confusion first. Then tension. Then something heavier. Mom, he said. I held his gaze. I'm coming back into my home. Romy recovered quickly. She always did. I think there's been a misunderstanding, she said smoothly. We were just trying to. Claire stepped forward. No, she said, voice precise. There is no misunderstanding. She opened her briefcase, removed a folder, handed a document directly to Daniel. Your mother is the legal controlling trustee of this property, Claire continued. Any attempt to remove her or deny access constitutes unlawful exclusion. Silence. Daniel looked down at the paper. Read, then read again. His face drained of color. Romy didn't take the paper. Didn't need to. She already knew. This is ridiculous, she said, sharper now. We were only trying to help. By locking her out? Claire asked. The question landed hard. The officer shifted slightly near the curb. Not threatening. Just present. Romy's voice faltered. Just for a second. That's not what happened. I spoke then. For the first time. You put my suitcase outside, I said quietly. No accusation. No drama. Just fact. Daniel looked at her. Really looked this time. And something broke. What did you do? Daniel asked. Not loud, but heavy. Romy turned to him. You're overreacting. I'm asking you a question. She exhaled sharply. Frustrated now. Cornered. I handled a situation you were too weak to handle, she snapped. There it was. No more softness. No more politeness. The truth. Daniel stepped back like the words had hit him physically. You locked my mother out of her own house. She was going to leave anyway. Romy shot back. She was already packing. I said nothing, because now they were speaking for themselves. That's not your decision, Daniel said. She can't manage this house, Romy continued. She's alone. She's emotional. Someone had to step in. Not like that. Her laugh was short, cold. This is exactly why nothing ever changes in this family. You hesitate. You wait. And everything falls apart. Daniel shook his head slowly. No, you decided. Without me. Another silence. Thicker now. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat softly. There's also the matter of attempted document interference, he said. Romy's head snapped toward him. What? He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. You contacted estate services prior to the burial, he continued. You requested accelerated transfer of property. Daniel turned again. Slower this time. Is that true? Romy didn't answer. That was answer enough. Claire closed the folder. This situation can proceed in two ways, she said calmly. Romy stiffened. Either we resolve this here, Claire continued, or we move forward legally. The word legally hung in the air. Heavy. Final. Daniel looked between us, between his wife and his mother, and for the first time since Harold died, he chose. Romy, he said quietly, step outside. She stared at him. You're serious? Yes. A long pause. Then she turned, grabbed her purse, and walked past me without another word. The door closed behind her, and just like that, the house felt different. Not healed, but honest. I walked back into my home slowly. Nothing had changed, and yet, everything had. The same table, the same walls, the same faint scent of Harold's cologne still lingering in the hallway. But the illusion was gone. Daniel stood in the living room, not sitting, not speaking, just standing there, like a man who had just seen something he couldn't unsee. I didn't know, he said finally. I believed him. That was the hardest part. You didn't ask, I replied. He flinched, because that was the truth. I thought she was helping, he said. I nodded slightly. She was. He looked up, confused, helping herself. Silence settled between us. I'm sorry, he said. I studied his face. The same face I had kissed goodnight when he was a child. The same eyes that once looked at me like I was the safest place in the world. People don't become strangers overnight. They become strangers one silence at a time. I know, I said, but I did not say I forgave him. Because forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. Over the next week, things changed. Quietly. Precisely. Romy did not return. Not to live. Not to decide. Legal boundaries were set. Documents were secured. Names were clarified. And I remained. In my home. One evening, I sat on the back porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun dip low behind the trees Harold had planted years ago. The light filtered through the leaves just the way it always had. Soft, golden, unchanged. I thought about everything that had happened. The door, the suitcase, the silence. And I realized something. They hadn't just tried to take my home. They had tried to take my place. A place is not given, and it is not taken. It is claimed. I lifted the cup to my lips, took a slow sip, and allowed myself a small, quiet smile. They locked me out of my house, I murmured softly. So I showed them who it truly belonged to.